Good morning. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is Wednesday, August 6th, and this is our business agenda. We will take a roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Ackerman,
Here.
Commissioner Cross,
Present.
Commissioner Mesner,
Here.
Commissioner Oath,
Here.
Commissioner Ray,
Here.
and Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 commissioners present.
Great. And that is a quorum, and it's good to see everybody. We have a business agenda before us. The first item on the agenda is commissioner comments. This gives commissioners an ability to provide comments to the rest of the commissioners and or our stakeholders, if any. Does anyone have commissioner comments? Commissioner Ackerman first, and then Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a very quick note to the Commission that CPW is engaging in rewriting their strategic plan throughout this year, and that Deputy Director Mercer and I have been meeting with them on behalf of ECMC and chatting about how their plan can incorporate our dual missions together. And so that's just an ongoing effort that the two of us are involved in. I just wanted to update the Commission that we're engaged in that.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Just a quick question. What does that mean for us?
There certainly is no effort on CPW's part to do things differently than we've been engaging with them currently. And so for us, really, I think what that means is just trying to ensure that energy remains, at least working on energy and habitat issues remains a key part of their strategic mission, and ensuring that we can incorporate anything in their strategic plan that helps us work together going forward and solidify their kind of unique role in our regulatory schema as opposed to their commenting role in others.
Okay, excellent. Well, we really appreciate your and Ms. Mercer's continued review on that and keep us up to date. Commissioner Messner?
Thanks. I just want to let folks know that the next Colorado Produced Water Consortium meeting is this Friday from 9 to 2. It will be a virtual meeting. The primary element of that meeting that we'll be discussing is the conversation around addressing potential barriers to increased use of recycled produced water, potentially presented by the prohibition of centralized produced water storage and treatment facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. There'll also be some information and updates on other topics during that meeting, but do encourage folks who are interested to listen in. There are opportunities to provide public comment as well. The information for that meeting is on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium website, and certainly folks can reach out to me if they have any questions about the agenda.
Again, thanks for the update, Commissioner Messner, and thanks for leading the charge on that front. Encourage folks to attend on Friday virtually at 9 a.m. Other Commissioner comments? All right, seeing none, we move to consent agenda. Does anyone have questions on consent? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve consent. Further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Consent agenda is approved. The next calendared item is, quote, Commissioner discussion, local government citing timelines in OGDP applications. I believe this matter originally arose in a meeting when I was out of office this summer. And I believe Commissioner Messner may have raised it. So Commissioner Messner, I'll turn the video mic over to you if that's okay.
Sure. And I'll just update you a little bit on kind of what I've asked the commission to think about and have a discussion on. But over the last year or so, we've seen a number of different OGDPs that include relevant local governments that do regulate oil and gas development within their jurisdictions. And there's been, in my opinion, some inconsistencies as far as what stage in the local government review those applications have been in prior to them coming to us for hearing. I bring this up because I've heard different I've had different local governments reach out to me, asking, what the standard is as far as where it needs to be in their local process before it comes to us. Understanding that in the mission change rulemaking, it was acknowledged that there was two possible paths for the dual permitting that happens between the state and local government. One is sequential permitting, where the local government goes first, and then the state follows, or concurrent permitting, which is a process that we encourage because of the efficiencies that allows both operators and the jurisdictions that are regulating oil and gas. And so, in that concurrent permitting, the rules indicate in a few different places the need for local government disposition and coordinating with local governments to ensure that efficiency that we're hoping for from concurrent permitting does actually occur. And in chatting with some different local governments that regulate oil and gas development, I think there's some differences in the local government processes as far as where they would like to see it go in their local government processes before it comes to hearing with us, ultimately with the goal of having those two processes mirror each other as closely as possible, although it's almost impossible to fully mirror those processes at the state and local government level in every situation. But understanding that, I thought maybe we could have a discussion as commissioners and perhaps provide some direction as to what we would like to see as far as the level of review at the local government level prior to it coming to us for hearing. So we have the benefit of some local government disposition, which at least for me as a commissioner is a really important element as I look at OGDPs. And certainly, I think we've seen a couple of maybe one or two applications that have been very early on in the local government process when they come to us for hearing, which almost makes it a sequential permitting where the state is going first in that situation instead of the local government, which I don't think was intended by the mission change rules either. And so what level of permitting needs to happen at that local government level before it should be scheduled for hearing before us is really the question that I'm asking commissioners. And so just to provide a little more color on that, there are local governments that have a purely administrative process. There are local governments that have it go through a two-stage process where it goes through a review process in front of the Planning Commission for a siting disposition, and then it goes on to an administrative process for further details associated with that. We've got some jurisdictions that don't go to either a Planning Commission or the Board of County Commissioners, but rather go through a hearing officer, and then we've got some that go directly to the Board of County Commissioners and don't go through the Planning Commission. And so there's a lot of different approaches to this, and so it's not necessarily going to be consistent as far as what level it needs to go through that local process before we have that benefit of the local government disposition when we're reviewing applications. But in the different conversations I've had with local governments, what they've asked is that staff coordinate with them a little closer prior to the development of a director's recommendation and prior to it scheduling before hearing, so that each jurisdiction has the benefit of providing that input to our process as to where they would like to see it be in their process before it gets scheduled to hearing before us, to ensure that there's that kind of concurrent element occurring between the local government process and the state government process. There are some situations that have been expressed to me where we've made a decision prior to the local government making a decision, and that's caused some consternation at the local government level. And so just trying to get some clarity on that. And there's not that many local governments that have a formal process for reviewing oil and gas development, particularly ones that are seeing active oil and gas applications before them. Maybe there's a dozen. And so it seems realistic that we can coordinate individually with each of those local governments to try to better align where that should be in the local government process before it gets scheduled before us. But that's just my thoughts on that, and wanted to bring it to the commission to see what other commissioners thought.
Well, great. Sorry I missed the initial flavor of the discussion, but you did a really good job of kind of summarizing where you're at. Um, I might go first just with some thoughts. As I think the commissioners know, for 20 some plus years, that's what I did. I represented local governments that were regulating oil and gas. And I was involved in the authorship of 181, which provided local governments with the ability to regulate more stringently. And I think the legislature tried to be very nuanced in its approach in 181 that tried to allow for the dozen or so local governments that wanted to exercise that authority to be able to do it in the manner that was most appropriate for each local jurisdiction. And I think that finds itself into Rule 302, which is our rule about local governments and permitting. And, we've got, 4 different approaches in terms of trying to understand siting information. The local government doesn't regulate siting, the local government regulates it and it's denied, the local government regulates and has approved, or the local government regulates and hasn't made a final decision. And for each of those, we tried to be nuanced in terms of allowing the local government the primacy in terms of how it wants to go about doing that. And then we've tried to adjust. I love the idea of process improvement, Commissioner Messner, and I think that to the extent that something comes to us and it's in that final category of the local government is involved, but they've not made a final decision, I think that's the area that you were looking to sort of fine tune our notice and approach. And I noted that in that instance, there's supposed to be a check-in from the director with the local government before the director's report is finalized. Maybe we need to relook at how that works. I'd be interested to know which local governments were, and I guess they weren't complaining, but just wanted to have us brush up the process for coordination, because, as we all know, 90% of the applications or so are with Weld County, and we've got a robust local government process with Weld County, and they generally do go first. But I appreciate you bringing it to the fore. I think it's always a great idea to try to, if we have an issue that needs to be looked at, let's take a look at it and let's get our staff to do. I'm hoping staff is listening in as well, because, we may end up with some direction to staff or to you, Commissioner Messner, to go further evaluate this and, come back with a report or something. So thanks for bringing it up. Any response to those comments, Commissioner Messner, or other comments from other commissioners? The floor is open for all of us just to talk here.
I mean, I'm happy to respond. I mean, you've got different local governments, both municipal governments and county governments, that some of them are early on in their stages of, utilizing the oil and gas regulations that they've developed, and some, are well established in, how they utilize their oil and gas regulations, and Weld County is a great example of that. And I think the concern here that I want to make sure that we embrace is this idea that concurrent permitting is encouraged, and we do encourage that because there's efficiencies to that. But I would hate to see anything go through our process and then, get substantially changed at the local government process as they apply their local government regulations. That would require a substantial change to an OGDP application that we've already approved at the state level, and that would mean the operator would have to go all the way back to the beginning. In lieu of that, we've seen a couple of instances where we've continued hearings on OGDPs because we needed additional information from the local governments, and I also think that that's potentially an inefficient process as well, and can be time consuming for both staff and commissioners as we review these applications. And so that's really the goal here, is to ensure that that goal of efficient permitting processes is occurring. And in my opinion, the way to do that is to, have that clear coordination with those local governments as to where they are in their processes before it gets scheduled to hearing, and just have a conversation with the local governments, whether that's Erie, whether that's Adams County, whether that's Arapahoe County, whether that's Weld County, Garfield County, so that all of them kind of know where they would like to see it be in their local government processes before it gets scheduled to hearing. And all of them are going to be a little different, so we can't be necessarily consistent in how we approach each of the local governments, but understanding that we don't see that many applications with local governments that regulate oil and gas development. I think it would be certainly reasonable to have individual coordination with each of the local governments that see applications and just better understand where it needs to be in those processes. Aurora is another example where Aurora, has a multi-step process as well, where they go through a planning commission for siting, and then they do the administrative review for some of the details of, what BMPs or technologies may be implemented. The siting ends up being probably the most important one that needs to get determined before it comes to us. That's the one that goes to the planning commission at Aurora. They would like to see it make it through the planning commission before it gets scheduled for a hearing before us, but they're okay with having that um, having that concurrent review process happen once they're doing the administrative stuff and just, coordinating the details of what type of rig is going to be used or what are the haul routes or things like that. So that's just an example. But like I said, each of them are a little different. And so probably, in my opinion, the direction to staff would be to work with each of those local governments to develop a local government specific guidance on, where it needs to be in that local government process before it gets scheduled to hearing before us.
So I appreciate those comments, and I don't want to dominate from the other commissioner's side, but just kind of two thoughts. It seems to me that we created the sort of four paths, local could go first and approve or deny. Local could decide not to do anything, or local could go not sequential, but at the same time, there's a word for that. And they've not made their final decision. And it seems that what we've done to pivot in those instances in which it's the last piece, where we don't know if they've approved or denied and they still haven't made a decision, that we've either felt comfortable with the application and gone ahead and held our hearing, or I agree with you, there've been a couple instances where we've said, well, wait a minute, we really would like more information from the local government, and we've continued it. I think that's not prevalent, but it has happened. And so that's kind of been our response to this question without really asking the question out front, Commissioner Messner. Is like, that's what we've been doing. And then I guess I would also put a point on it that, certain local governments, Weld in particular, generally always goes first, and they're very involved in our hearing. And I believe we try to provide, a good deal of deference to the work they're doing because they've got a robust authority over there. They're now working with municipalities as well. So there's that kind of flip side of it, in which they probably would want to say, keep it as is, or even give us more deference. With regard to your idea of having staff direct a, go look-see at the ones that are doing concurrent, that's the word that you used, and see if we've got it right. I'd almost, staff's overworked, et cetera. I would almost like to suggest, John, or Commissioner Messner, that you take that up. You're the local government commissioner, and I don't know how much bandwidth you've got, but there's only a handful of jurisdictions, I think, that are really maybe asking the question or wanting to refine guidance along the lines of that situation. I also think we need to be talking to operators too, because the operators, it's ultimately, to a certain extent, between the operator and the local government to make a determination of which path they want to go down. But I think us looking into it and providing that suggestion through guidance or otherwise, that the hardier the look by the local government and concurrent siting, the better for us, is definitely a message that I could get could get behind, because that's how I've approached it with my background and with the work that we've been doing. So those are some additional thoughts. I really appreciate this discussion. Commissioners Oath, Ray, Cross, Ackerman, thoughts, Commissioner Cross, and then Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Messner, for raising this. I'll be somewhat brief in my comments. I agree that it's good to make sure that we're finding the appropriate efficiencies. I will say I don't know if putting additional guidance on staff is necessarily beneficial in my mind. As Chair Robbins indicated, I think staff's already significantly overworked, and so I don't want to put additional work on them to talk to all the different local governments, make guidance with all the different local governments on where they should be or can be. I do think it is important to have conversations with the local governments. And we've had a couple instances that jump to mind, such as the box elder cap, where getting information on what's important to the local governments really aids in the decisions that we make and the analysis that we provide. And so I think it's important to have that communication, understand where the local governments are, what issues they may have, so we can make informed decisions. But I do think to a certain extent too, as Chair Robbins just noted, with respect to putting it on the operators, ultimately, I think it's the operators' issue in a lot of ways. And if something does come before us and it's still pending before the local government and the local government doesn't like the way it is, I think that's a risk that the operators take. I do agree with you, Commissioner Messner, that we should have increased communication. I think having the information and the knowledge as to what issues may arise in the local government processes, what BMPs, what siting issues. I know there's been several instances recently where we've talked about haul routes, et cetera, that have been important to local governments. And it's been something that we've looked at, such as making sure haul routes aren't going near schools if it's going to be during the school year and things like that. And so I think it's important to know that information and have the communications with the local governments to know what things they're looking at with respect to those issues. And so I'm definitely in favor of having the communications. I don't know that I want to put additional work on staff to create individualized guidance with each of the local governments for something that may be helpful, may not be. As Chair Robbins noted, a lot of times Weld County is done first. A lot of times Garfield County is done first. So a lot of these governments where we do see this information, it's not necessarily an issue, and don't want to put too much emphasis on something that we have had those continuances, and I agree the inefficiencies are inappropriate, but put too much emphasis on situations that are still somewhat rare. So increased communication, yes, but I don't know that I'd be in favor of requiring individualized guidance with each of the local governments.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Messner, for bringing this up. I appreciate it. It's something that's taken some getting used to for me on the commission, as I love buttoned up process. Ideally for me, all local processes, permits would be in place prior to coming to us, the primary agency. But it makes a lot of sense to me why the commission at the time created a significant process for concurrent application processes. It creates significant efficiency, and I understand certainly why we would do that with regard to our lengthy processes. And so I really have just kind of one finer point to add. I kind of also go along the line of continue to figure it out as we go, as these issues don't come up with a lot of frequency. But I think back to the issues that have caused us concern and potential for continuance and even continuance. And usually it's when there's still a significant philosophical issue at play with the local jurisdiction that has not yet been resolved, even though, often processes are not completed. Most often in our OGDPs, the line of logic generally follows between the operator and the local jurisdiction. Where we run into problems is when we see an application that says there's still a significant issue philosophically that we're trying to work out with this local jurisdiction. I think at that time it's appropriate for the operator to step back and say, we want to be on the same page on this issue before we go to the the OGDP stage. I think as long as people approach it that way philosophically, I don't know that there's another way to really button up the myriad of approaches of local governments, as many local governments do rely significantly upon our process, and others have their own significant or pointed processes. So it's definitely a complex issue, and really appreciate Commissioner Messner's approach to keeping an eye on it. But I would say that I'm kind of more on the page of Commissioner Cross, that operators definitely need to make sure those philosophical issues are buttoned up that won't cause significant deviation at the OGDP stage in order to either cause a continuance or a do-over. And I think that is largely, and staff can help kind of identify those, but I do think that largely operators have certainly the incentive to try to avoid those situations.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Other commissioners, Commissioner Oath.
Yeah, thanks, all. I guess the one item or topic where maybe my thoughts differ a little bit is on this issue of, kind of who suffers, I guess. I think a number of commissioners noted they felt like this is really an issue that impacts the operator either the most or only. And I guess I haven't been through as many of these as you all were there, when these rules were adopted. So, but from my perspective, I can see how it actually impacts and puts the local government potentially in a really challenging situation, as well as us, ultimately in our hearing process, if it is one of those, as Commissioner Ackerman said, kind of philosophical differences. And that's really challenging for us as well as the local government. So I do like this idea and really appreciate recognizing that all of the local government processes are different. And so where it makes sense for each of those to be along in the process may differ. So I like the idea of somehow having the conversations with them to better understand, what would be desired from the local government perspective and makes sense, with how each of their processes work, so that, when an OGDP comes to us, it is, the local government even has had a chance to even understand and evaluate if there are going to be any of those major philosophical differences. I think that would be really beneficial. So that's all I had to say.
Other
So
commissioners.
I'm happy to I'm happy to follow up on this and work with the different local governments and staff. I did work with staff individually on this initially, and they asked that I come to the commission and get direction. And so that's why I'm here presenting this. I don't envision this to be some sort of lengthy guidance process with each local government, but rather just a blueprint for how you would coordinate with a particular local government based on that local government's process. And so having some record of how that would best work, I think is a good idea, so that, as things change and staff change, that there's still clarity on, how to check in with the local government and what process and, when it might be best to go to hearing. But I'm happy to work on this and then bring something back based on the conversations that I have with the different local governments. And I acknowledge that there's always the ability for sequential permitting where the local government goes first. But I think local governments also are looking for efficiencies. I think operators are looking for efficiencies, and I think that's why we've encouraged the concurrent permitting process. Not requiring it, right? But encouraging it, and just trying to better understand where that needs to be at the local government level, as well as what commissioners need from the local government process in order to help us make decisions at the state level. I think is important, because having that level of consistency, I think, makes for a better, more informed process.
So I think from my perspective, I appreciate all the comments we've received here. Commissioner, why don't you take the direction from all of us and go forward, and have discussions. If I'm thinking about whom to discuss this with, I think it's the list you put with maybe one or two others: Erie, Adams, Weld, Garfield, Aurora, Fort Collins, and Broomfield, at least to start. I think those are folks that we generally speak to. I think the discussion with Weld can like envelope all the local governments within Weld, Greeley, and a couple of the others that by MOU have ceded to Weld Energy and Department the siting review. And I would, at least as one commissioner, suggest that you approach it so that you have that discussion with Weld, that discussion also sort of recognizes how we do it, with Weld in terms of the concurrent process. I think that's an important discussion that should always be updated, because that's 90% of the wells that come to us are through Weld County. And so, having a discussion with Weld where they kind of do sequential, that they generally go first, and sort of weaving into this analysis a quick check back to the commission about how Weld's feeling about that would also be helpful. And I know that's not what you brought to the table, but I'd suggest that maybe this get expanded just a bit so that we have that discussion and take advantage of your expertise in the local government commissioner hat. I also don't, at least one commissioner, I just would like an informal report back. I don't need, guidance drafted or a blueprint drafted. I'd like kind of get a formal report to get a sense of how big of a problem needs to be itched here. But that's just me. If we're giving Commissioner Messner guidance here, that's my thoughts. Did any commissioner want to amplify on their thoughts about what this task looks like? All right, you are so tasked, Commissioner Messner. Are you good with all that?
Yep, I'll work on it and get back to you.
Awesome. Great discussion. So thank you, Commissioner Messner, for raising an important topic. Commissioners, as each of us has our different hats on, if you see important topics that need to be looked into, please feel free to raise them back to us, and we'll continue this process of process improvement with our constituents as we move forward with the local government permitting process. We've got a couple of reports up next. Let's take 5, top off our copies and get ready for some reports on the marginal wall plugging. And if we could get Ms. Osborne up and running with her slide, we'll return at 9:39. Okay, welcome back, the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. We now will hear a report on marginal well plugging program update. Dita Osborne is the ECMC Senior Air Quality Specialist. Welcome, Dita.
Good morning, commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. As the chair just said, I am Dita Osborne, the Senior Air Quality Specialist in the Cumulative Impacts and Energy Transition Unit. I'm also the program manager for the Marginal Well Plugging Program, and I'm excited to be here today to give you this update. I was last here in November to present on the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, or MERP, and a lot has changed since then. What started as the MERP has now evolved into the Marginal Well Plugging Program. Today, I will be giving an update on the program. I will go over the results of application round 1, and I will talk about the next steps for the program. I'll start with some background on the program. That includes the MERP and the Enterprise Marginal Well Plugging, or MWEP, funding sources. So I'll start with the MERP. In August of 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act provided new authorities under Clean Air Act, Section 136, to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas operations through the creation of the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, or MERP. In 2023, under the MERP, Phase 1 funding was set up through the EPA and DOE for mitigating emissions from marginal conventional wells. This $350 million in formula grant funding was awarded to 14 states to measure and reduce methane emissions from marginal wells through voluntary plugging and abandonment. Out of this, Colorado was awarded $12.6 million in May of 2024. And for the Enterprise Marginal Well plugging program in 2024, through enactment of Senate Bill 24229, the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Board expanded its powers and duties to include collecting an additional marginal well fee from operators to fund plugging, reclaiming, and remediating qualifying marginal wells and eliminating the risk of such qualifying marginal wells from becoming orphaned. Beginning in 2025, funding for enterprise marginal well plugging, or MWEP, will be available to assist operators in voluntarily and permanently plugging and abandoning marginal wells. In January, we merged this new state funding source into the program structure, creating the Marginal Well Plugging Program. Through an application process, operators have volunteered marginal wells for reimbursement of plugging and site closure costs through MERP and MWEP. This slide shows the distinctions between the two programs in the outer columns, and the center columns highlight the similarities. Both are reimbursement programs that share several eligibility criteria. They also share an application, web page, program manager, and services contractor. Orphan wells are not eligible for either program. They differ in the eligible production rates and financial assurance options. It is important to note that MWEP eligibility is less than or equal to 2 barrels of oil equivalent a day, and the MERP is eligible for 15 barrels of oil equivalent a day, which casts a much wider net for wells in the state. We started building this program last May with the support and guidance of several colleagues at ECMC, DNR, CDPHE, CSU, and other state MERP programs. As we have been planning the program, we understand that our stakeholder and outreach engagement efforts are crucial for the success. Because the program is voluntary for operators, there has been a tremendous amount of outreach and engagement efforts. We have given several informative presentations and updates. We published a MERP webpage last year and have now updated it to be the Marginal Well Plugging webpage that links to MERP and MWEP web pages. We sent informative emails to smaller operators and plan to send out updates as we go. We have met with other MERP states, followed their progress and lessons learned throughout the process of building their own MERP programs. We also collaborated with CSU on a field study to characterize methane emissions in support of well prioritization for the MERP. And you will hear more about this study from Tim Vaughn, who is presenting next. Our team created an application for the program. After internal review, it was sent to a small group of operators that volunteered to provide feedback. Revisions were made to incorporate the feedback that we received before publication. And I will go into more detail on the well evaluation process, the field operations, and the public dissemination of results later in the presentation. This map shows where marginal wells eligible for MERP and MWEP are located in the state. The eligible marginal wells are present in most major oil and gas producing basins, including populated areas along the Front Range, near Florence and Canyon City, south of Durango, and near Rangeley and Craig. Many wells are located in or near disproportionately impacted communities in rural areas of the state. There are many more wells that classify as marginal, but the well numbers displayed are those that meet all of the eligibility criteria for MERP and MWEP. It is important to note that all MWEP eligible wells are also MERP eligible. So all of the blue dots that you see here would also be red, but we wanted to distinguish the MWEP eligible wells on the map. ECMC undertook a robust interview and procurement process in order to contract with a vendor who has the skills to fulfill all of the administrative duties to help manage the program. We would like to welcome TAC Energy, the vendor that we selected to be our services contractor for the Marginal Well Plugging program. TAC is a Denver-based engineering and consulting firm specializing in oil and gas asset retirement, methane emissions measurement, and regulatory compliance. Their company has deep roots in Colorado and strong relationships with small operators who make up a significant portion of their client base. They help these operators navigate Colorado's regulatory requirements and maintain compliance while achieving cost-effective well plugging and site remediation. They will primarily be aiding ECMC with the management of this program. They will not be plugging wells, but rather aiding in the monitoring, data gathering, reporting, assisting recipients, and other tasks related to the management of the grant program. So as we were building the program, there was a challenge that was evident from day one. We spent countless hours on the structure, the outreach and engagement efforts, a web page, an application. And what it all came down to is that the program hinged on operators volunteering wells into the program. So we published the application, and it was open from April 4th to May 20th of this year. It took about 4 days to get our first application, then another few days for the second one. There was a slow trickle of applications for a couple of weeks, and then the floodgate opened a few days before it closed. I am thrilled to report that in total, 34 operators submitted applications for a total of 211 locations, and this by far exceeded our expectations for round one. Of the 211 locations, 175 were well locations, and the other 36 were non-well locations that I'll speak to on the next slide. Of the 175 well nominations, 30 of those were found to be ineligible, leaving 145 wells potentially eligible. Of those, all 145 were determined to be eligible for MERP, and 55 of them were also determined to be eligible for MWEP. In our effort to prioritize using federal funding first, 118 wells were awarded MERP support and 27 were awarded MWEP support. A large number of these wells are located in disproportionately impacted communities. For the 33 non-plugging locations that were volunteered, I just wanted to note that the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise imposes and collects mitigation fees and funds the plugging, reclaiming, and remediating of marginal wells in the state. So locations without wells are eligible for reclamation and remediation reimbursement through enterprise marginal well plugging. 29 of those will be funded under MWEP, and 4 of the locations were determined to be under Public Utility Commission authority, so they were not eligible. This map shows the locations of all award offers. We are happy to report that all wells that met eligibility requirements were awarded this application round. You can see that the wells will be plugged in most of the major oil and gas producing basins of the state. The well prioritization process considers operator and well eligibility, GIS-based factors for proximity to disproportionately impacted communities and high population areas, and other factors related to protection of public health and the environment. Because the primary goal of the MERP is to maximize the amount of methane emissions mitigated, the wells also went through a methane emissions assessment that used emission data from the applications, the ECMC database, CDPHE's Oil and Natural Gas Annual Emissions Inventory Reporting, or ONGAR, database, and the CSU Marginal Well Study that you will hear about next. This is the process for operators to participate in the program. We are currently in the well evaluation process stage. Operators have until August 8th, this Friday, to accept or decline their award offers. As of this morning, 25 operators have accepted their awards. Those who accept will go into an award contract, which allows for 12 months or more in some cases for them to complete the field operations. They will submit documentation for reimbursement when field operations conclude. The wells selected for either of the programs will have pre-plugging methane measurements taken. Plugging and other field operations will take place. Post-plugging methane measurements will be taken to quantify the emissions mitigated, and then operators will submit the documentation for reimbursement. We will have a data dashboard on the marginal well plugging page that will display progress metrics, and it will be updated on at least a monthly basis. This is the timeline for the marginal well plugging program. It includes project milestones that are essential for monitoring progress, managing risk, and ensuring that our project stays on track. As you can see, several major milestones have been met or are happening later this year. I feel that it is important to highlight all of the ECMC programs that have contributed to building this program and making it a success. A huge thanks to all the staff that have contributed their time and expertise to make this happen. This is the link to our marginal well plugging webpage and the email address to send any questions about plugging to. Next up, you will hear the results of the CSU marginal well study from Tim Vaughn. I appreciate your time today. These funding sources provide an opportunity for our state to mitigate methane emissions and improve air quality. We know that methane is a major contributor to climate change, and our work at the state level will improve public health and protect our climate. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Really appreciate the information. It's a wealth of information, and I just want to applaud you and your team. This was a heavy lift. There's a lot that needed to be done from SB 24-229, and you've done yeoman's work here to get it up and running. So great job. I want to take this and report back to some of the Senate and House sponsors, just sort of show what we've done and where this is going and how successful it's been. I don't have a ton of questions, but just wanted to really applaud the work here. So thank you very much to you. And I like that last slide that showed all the other participants from ECMC and other agencies. Commissioner Cross had raised his hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. This was very helpful. I also want to say thank you for the work on this. I think it's also good to see the amount of feedback that we got from operators looking to get rid of a lot of these wells and really help in meeting our mitigation goals. I was curious, you talked about some of the interactions with other MERP states and like lessons learned, and I was kind of curious, have those other states been on similar timelines? Have they had similar successes? What kind of things have we seen in comparison, and what kind of things did you learn from talking to those other MERP states?
Yeah, we communicated a lot throughout the process. There was a big kickoff meeting in June of last year for all of the states to present on what they plan to do with their programs. A lot changed because we learned a lot as we moved forward in the process. I kept in close contact with Pennsylvania and Utah, and Pennsylvania was ahead of us for a long time. They published their application and closed that a few months before we did. And then Utah got a service contractor similar to the one that we chose for our program to help with the administrative duties of the grant program. But with my last check-in with the DOE, they let me know that Colorado is leading the way right now, and we're likely to be the first state to start plugging wells. So I was very excited to hear that. But it sounds like Pennsylvania and Texas and Utah are pretty close behind us.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Oath.
Thanks, and I'll also echo the words of positive feedback. Really important program and really great work, and exciting time. So thanks for bringing in the update. I'm just wondering, and it may be too early to tell, but is there a way to estimate the amount of methane emissions we're expecting to reduce by?
We won't know those numbers until
Okay.
TAC Energy goes out and starts taking the pre-plugging measurements. And then
Okay.
ideally, when they do the post-plugging measurements, there won't be any detected. So once we start taking the measurements, that's likely to be what will be mitigated.
Okay, great. Well, when the time is right, getting an update on those numbers would be of great interest. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we plan to present the results of application round 1 to the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Board this fall. So we will have the final numbers for the acceptance and for the funding that will go into the first round.
And those final acceptances, that's due Monday, is that right?
That's due this Friday, the 8th.
Oh, okay. The 8th. Okay.
Mhm.
Great. So we can update our information with that information once we get it.
Yeah, right now we have 25 out of 31 have accepted, and a few others have indicated that they plan to accept.
Excellent. Other questions? Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate this information. We've got 93 stakeholders and folks listening in, and I know they appreciate this information as well. Well done, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, next on the agenda is a report on the marginal well methane emission study presentation. Tim Vaughn, PhD research scientist with the Energy Institute of Colorado State University. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I'm just going to pull up my slides here. I'm more of a Teams, not a Zoom guy, so bear with me for a second.
We run into these virtual formatting issues.
I think that's working now.
Yes, you just got it into screen share mode, so good job. You now have a Zoom credential.
All right, thanks. I'll add that to the list. So hi, I'm Tim Vaughn. Thanks for having me this morning, and thanks for the intro from Dita. So we're just going to give you an update and overview of the study that we did corresponding to the marginal wells in Colorado. And so again, this study is focused on marginal wells in the state of Colorado, and it's sort of like a pilot study to do the emissions assessment, getting some understanding for this MERP program, which as Dita said, has kind of morphed a little bit, but the goal is to provide federal funding to assist well owners and operators to identify and eliminate methane emissions from low-producing marginal wells by supporting the voluntary and permanent plugging and reclamation of these wells. And so the whole purpose of this is to maximize emission reduction and public benefit per dollar. And so for the marginal aspect of things, most folks on this probably know, but marginal production or being a strip well is kind of defined in the IRS for 15 barrels of oil equivalent or less, or 6,000 cubic feet of gas in equivalence to 1 barrel. And so there's a little bit of minor details that probably aren't that important, but I think for that they look at the basically volume divided by the calendar year. And so for this study, we did basically the days in production as a divider. And we took basically whether oil or gas was marginal, or both were below the threshold was kind of the deciding factor there. And so this study only considered conventional wells. And by that, we mean those that are vertical or slightly deviated. So wells were considered conventional if the true vertical depth divided by the measured depth was greater than or equal to 0.9. And so that's basically the actual vertical depth. And then the measured depth is along the wellbore path. So basically not horizontal wells, just vertical or nearly vertical. And so our objective in this study is to select and survey a sample of marginal wells throughout the state, considering specific preferences, which Dita alluded to, and I'll talk about a little bit more. And then once we have those sites selected, we'll go out and do surveys and identify and quantify methane emissions that we observe. And one thing to note here is that the focus isn't just on the wellheads, it's other equipment on those locations that we surveyed. And then once we do that, we'll attempt to understand or see if we can, elucidate what distinguishing factors might contribute to increased methane emissions within that sample population. And so for our site selection, we kind of divided this up into community criteria and operator criteria. And so for the community aspect, we used the CDPHE EnviroScreen shapefile. And so we basically took totals and other aggregate data from the spatially intersecting block groups. And so the main factors that we were looking at here were the total population, the EnviroScreen score, and then whether it's flagged as a disproportionately impacted community. And for the operator criteria, we were looking at the ONJAIR data for estimated CH4 per well, oil production, gas production, whether or not the operator was a major operator, whether or not all wells on the location were considered marginal, what the age of the wells were, and then how many wells that particular operator had in their portfolio. And so once we had all these, we rank ordered these eligible sites in ascending or descending order as it was appropriate. And then we weighted the scores as shown by each of those percentages. So total population 10%, EnviroScreen 10%, the IC 5%, and so on. And then basically we were to include all operators with eligible sites. So basically the ranking is not pure ranking, and you may end up with only one or two operators or something like that. So basically it's the top six locations per potential operator were chosen as the primary targets, and then additional sites were added as needed. And so in other words, if an operator had one well pad with one well, that was in. And if someone had thousands of well pads and thousands of wells, then basically we took the top six ranked locations from those. And so this is a similar but simpler approach to like Nettle's Primo software. That's kind of where the idea of ranking by the criteria and coming up with the weighting came from. They go into a bit more depth, but this was the process that we used. And so I'm a visual person. I like pictures. So I'll show this, but this is basically the census block group data from the CDPHE and EnviroScreen data set. And we've got basically all our wells shown there. And so some of these are kind of like in very densely populated areas or are close to borders. And so what we did was we basically defined a well pad, which is sort of like a location ID. And we basically drew a 50-meter circle around that, like you can see in the square there with the green dot. And so with that would be one well pad with one well. And in places where there was more, we basically drew that same 50-meter diameter circle, dissolved it into a shape, called that a well pad. And then we put a 5-kilometer buffer around that as like a, sort of an area of potential impact, so that we could basically do a little bit of averaging with the block groups, because you have the outline of the block group, you don't exactly know where the population density is within that, and it might be adjacent to several. And so that's sort of a little bit like of an averaging kind of a thing. And so, with that, we aggregate the data from those block groups, assign them to the well pad, and then assign them to the individual wells, and then do our ranking. And so what that ended up looking like was going from this larger list of statewide eligible wells to our down selection to our study eligible wells. And so that's basically, like I said, the top six pads per operator that were listed there. And so the next thing to do from there was to basically ECMC communicated this study and sent letters out to the various operators. And then we waited for responses, and we went out and measured the sites of the operators who responded voluntarily. And so for this, we ended up measuring 117 wells and other equipment at 46 locations from 9 operators. And on the previous slide, that study eligible list was 171 wells at 95 locations from 22 operators. And in the bar graph there, basically the orange bars are the sites that we went to. So on the bottom, you just have the 22 different operators, and then their well count and the log scale on the y-axis. And we kind of have an operator in each decade, and we've got the top 3, a little bit of a gap, 3 more, and a little bit of a gap, and then we've got good coverage across the size of operators, everywhere from less than 10 to thousands of wells. So with our sites identified and our sort of route planning done based on that selection, we went to go out and do some surveys. And so for that, we did 2 primary methods. We basically have an OGI camera operator doing a survey of all the piping and valves and fittings of the different equipment. And then any leaks that we identified, we basically measured with the high flow sampler. And then the other approach that we had was our basically instrumented truck there with our trace gas analyzers. There's a sample mast on the front of it. It's got a weather station with wind speed, direction, compass, GPS, temperature, relative humidity. And inside we have Aerodyne QC Tildus laser spectrometer for methane, acetylene, and nitrous oxide. We've got a Picaro G2210i for methane and ethane, and then various other instruments like Lord for CO2 and a few other little things. But basically, we've got very highly sensitive instruments in that truck, and we can drive around and do driving surveys. And then the other thing we can do is downwind methods. We used OTM 33, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And then just some sort of caveats for these. So for the OGI, we did full surveys at nearly every location. 1 or 2 of the locations that we went to had 1 or 2 marginal wells and an otherwise non-marginal pad. And so in those cases, we only surveyed the marginal equipment, which basically meant that we were able to link a separator and some other supporting equipment back to that one individual well, we would include that. And if the gas was kind of commingled, marginal, non-marginal, like in a tank battery, we just would exclude that on those few sites. Another key important thing here is that any methane that we observed was considered a leak or an emission as far as the study. We weren't distinguishing between vented and fugitive, whether things were permitted, et cetera. Basically, if we saw methane, we tried to quantify it. So for the high flow, that's basically a direct measurement technique with a handheld device, and we measured every accessible emission that we could, except for at one facility, we had a little bit of equipment trouble. The fan wouldn't work because the connector to the battery came loose. Managed to get that fixed by the time we got to the next site. So we were all good there. And we did not use the high flow to measure tanks. We tried to use OTM if possible. And we were limited in that in certain cases just because of either property boundaries out in eastern Colorado, being adjacent to fields or other folks' property. And then on the western slope, we ran into issue with like the wind direction. That's a downwind technique. You have to get downwind of your source. Obviously, you can't do that if there's a mountain headball there or a cliff. So we tried to work with that as best as we could. And then for the driving survey in OTM, we attempted to drive the truck around each equipment piece, getting upwind and downwind of it, looking for enhancements above 1 DPM. And if we saw these, we could either quantify them using the OTM method in the truck, or we could basically use the information the truck is giving us to tell the OGI operator, hey, look a little bit more closely here. Let's see if we can really identify this emission and capture it. And so here's just some examples of using the OGI camera to scan some pipes and fittings on a wellhead, and then doing the quantification with the high flow. So the high flow that we used was the Sensors Zinc Semtech High Flow 2. And for the most part, we used the old accessories from the BlackRock unit. So there's a hose that attaches to the handheld unit and a bag. And that kind of helps if you have a fitting or something like that, you're blocking the wind. If there's more than one small source in the area, you can kind of capture them all. So we used the bag a lot. And like I said, tanks, we surveyed with the camera and measured with OTM where we could. And so there's a little bit of more nuance with the leak versus emission thing, and I'll try and just keep hitting on those points as we go through them. But so when we talk about emissions from tanks or ECDs or other combustion devices, we're basically talking about vents, thief hatches, and then like the exhaust. And so those are things that we would measure with the downwind technique and not with the high flow sampler. And so for the OTM, it's OTM 33A, EPA method. And basically what we would do here is on the left-hand picture, if you look, you have a blue box, that would be the truck. And then it's some distance away from a pumping unit. And we basically would park the van there for 20 minutes, typically at the minimum. It could go longer. And we look at basically the variation in wind speed and direction. And then we look at the same time as at the time series of the concentration profile that comes in with that wind. It's assumed a Gaussian profile. So you basically fit a Gaussian to your data set. And then you can deduce the emission rate based on that profile and the wind speed at the time. That's a high level summary, but that's the gist of it. And so those are the methods that we used. And in total for the equipment surveyed, we had our 9 operators and we went to 46 locations. We looked at 117 wells, we looked at 95 separators, 127 tanks, and 18 ECDs. And so for the emissions identified, there was 106 in total. And then an important thing to point out with all of this, and to keep in mind with the kind of the analysis, is that we weren't able to measure all sources. That happens quite frequently in these field studies for various reasons, usually safety or accessibility. But for the high flow, we were able to measure 48, and with the OTM, we were able to measure 20. And 8 of those pieces of equipment we were able to measure with both. And the equipment that we looked at, the key ones here are basically going to be your separators, tanks, and wellheads. And then we also had a new category, or a couple of them, that were pump jack engines, heater treaters, and then a gas compressor. And I'll talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. And so, yeah, here's that in glorious detail, but basically the emission sources and those that we were not able to measure. So we have our equipment, which is a gas compressor, ECD, heater treater, pump jack engines, separators, tanks, and wellheads. And then we basically tried to categorize each of the sources that we found on each of those so that you could do some sort of cross sections and make some things in common. And so for the compressor, that's sort of an oddball, and that has the crankcase vent there. That was the one emission that we found, and we were able to measure it. For the ECD, for these, we were basically looking at the exhaust plume, and I'll talk about that in more detail. We didn't find any other kind of like leaks on like pilot gas supply or fuel gas supply or process gas. On heater treaters, we have a few categories. Control fittings, these are basically common across all categories that have pneumatic controls or sort of your basically whatever 3H stainless tubing and associated fittings and things. And then we had some pressure regulators there. For the pump jack engines, the main thing that we saw was these fuel gas regulators. And then separators probably bear the most time to talk about. That was the kind of the biggest and most complex source that we found. And so for those, we have control boxes and control fittings. Again, this is pneumatic control lines. And so control box here is pretty generic. It could be like a high-low pressure set point, various dump controllers, plunger timers, any sort of thing with some intelligence in it that basically controls some aspect of the process. We just called a control box. And then we have the heater exhaust for basically heated separators, level switches, and then process fitting would be the sort of antithesis to the control fitting. This is like the actual produced gas that's flowing that you're metering and stuff. And then some pressure regulators, temperature controllers, valves. And then tanks, of course, have Nardos, Nodo valves, thief hatches. And then some of the tanks were actually heated with their own exhaust like the separators. And then we have wellheads. So that's what all the cryptic categories mean. And then I'll talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. So the compressor crankcase vent, we only saw this at one operator. The compressor was actually being used for gas lift, which isn't all that common in my experience at these marginal wells, but in this one case we saw it. And so we just saw a small leak and measured it. And that was a total of 2.34 SLPM. The other thing to talk about is ECDs. And again, these are enclosed combustion devices made to basically destroy VOC and tank vapors and things like that, and maybe some other process emissions in other cases. And so this one's a bit tough to say, but as a camera operator, it's a bit subjective. You can sort of look at things, and if you look at a whole bunch of things, you see, sort of what's typical and what's atypical. And like we said, for ECDs and tanks in this study, if we saw anything with the camera, even if it was very tiny and barely discernible, we call that an emission. And so in this case for ECDs, you would basically see fairly common, all looked about the same. And then we had one that we were able to measure that looked quite a bit different than the others and seemed to have elevated emissions, but by all indications, and speaking with operators, it was doing its thing. And so we were able to measure one of these ECDs that had 12.35 liters per minute, as opposed to the other ones, which are more in the 2 to 3 liter per minute when we measure them. And so like one of these, operator F with a 2.98 standard liters per minute, that was actually two ECDs right next to each other. So we weren't able to differentiate them with the downwind method. They kind of blend together. And so those two together came as 3 liters a minute. And then another time when we noticed one of these ECDs and it looked like it had greater emissions with the OGI cameras, sure enough, we measured it and it was about, 4x of that. And so just an observation from the study. Heater treaters, these weren't all that common, mainly with one operator there. And so these are kind of a more of a, if you're a heavily oil weighted site, you might have these. And this was actually interesting for folks that do field measurements. The OGI camera is much more sensitive to VOC than it is to methane, in fact. And so we found what looked like typical small fitting leaks on these things. And we went to measure them with the high flow sampler, which is methane specific. And we came up with very, very low emission rates as to what we'd expect. And so that's just kind of an interesting indication that the plume that we were seeing was probably more heavily VOC than it was methane. And again, this is overall contribution. You can see that's very small, 0.01 liters per minute. Pump jack engines was another kind of interesting observation during the study. Again, we went to 117 wells and encountered 13 pump jacks or pumping units. So these are the bobbing horse head things people call them. And these are all basically driven by internal combustion engines. And in this case, we're calling the pump jack engine is separate and distinct from the wellhead. So basically, you know, sucker rod, stuffing box, wellhead, Christmas tree, piping, all that stuff. This is distinct from that. This is basically the engine on the back end of the thing and the fuel gas that's being supplied to it. And so in this case, they were basically using the produced gas, and there was some down pressure regulation, and the regulators were weeping or venting. And so this was kind of common. Had to talk about it with the operator. They said, yeah, those are on the repair list. Those are aging out. We got to get those fixed. But so that was, one emission source there. Separators. So separators, we screened 95 and we found 29 of those were emitting, and we found 51 individual emission sources. And then we were able to measure basically 39 with the high flow and 5 with the OTM. And in total, the emissions were in the 10 to 20 liter a minute range. And so for a lot of these, you may notice that the OTM is higher, and in some cases that's easily explainable by the fact that it's downwind and there may be other tiny sources contributing, or in certain cases, where there's the presence of like combustion exhaust or some other elevated venting that you can't reach with the high flow, or it would be excluded from the high flow, it would be included in that. And so that should explain most of that. And we'll talk about those in a bit more detail, the separators, also with the tanks. And so we screened 127 tanks, and we're able to note basically some form of emissions or venting coming from 28 tanks and 29 different sources. Unfortunately, like I said before, we only have the downwind measurement as our capability to measure those tanks, and just basically for the layout of the different sites and the way the wind speed happened to be when we were there, we were only able to get 4 good measurements, and those totaled 23 liters a minute from tanks. And wellheads, so again, 117 wellheads screened, and we only found 1 emission on a wellhead, which is actually kind of incredible after having done this several times. Usually, wells that are just sort of conventional wells that don't have any moving parts on them, it's just pipes and flanges. They're made to hold high pressure. You don't tend to see a bunch of leaks on them. Where you do tend to see more of them is on things where there's motion. So if there's plunger lifts or catchers or lubricators or sucker rods and stuffing boxes. But we didn't really see any of that here. And so we found 1 emission, and it was on a damage control fitting, and we were able to measure that with both sources. So very low emissions noted from the actual wellheads. And so that's kind of a detailed picture of all the sources and the emissions that we found. And then hopefully what we were going to be able to get at was some sort of indicator of like, hey, what's the thing, right? What can we target to basically reduce these emissions, or what is the benefit that we're going to get if we plug these wells and we get total abatement there. And so this correlation matrix here, basically, if you have dark red, it's perfect positive correlation, and dark blue is going to be a perfect negative correlation. And so 1 and -1 is basically the limits. And basically everything is obviously perfectly correlated with itself, and then with the other things to varying degrees. And so what we'd like to see is basically CH4 emissions, something else with a very high number, right? And so we don't really see that. We see a little bit of a correlation with well count. We don't see much of a correlation at all with oil production or gas production with the methane emissions. We don't see much of a correlation at all with age, and we see a reasonably moderate correlation with equipment count. And so just to kind of flip that around and give a different example, you can see that well count is strongly correlated with gas production and equipment count, 0.72 and 0.82. And so to review these each in a little bit further, we basically did a bunch of least squares regressions. We tried different normalizations, different transformations, different generalized linear models, but you can kind of just look at the plots and see that there's not a strong correlation there. It's a bit of a scatter. And so here's just an example of 2 of those. We had our best correlation was with equipment count, R squared of 0.13, and not really significant fit there. And then our worst correlation was with well age. Basically, there's no correlation there in the data set, the sample that we had. And so Yeah, the most strong indicator we have is that the presence of equipment is the most likely indicator of how many leaks you're going to find. And so I'll do a little bit more discussion on separators and tanks. So this one is pretty interesting. So one thing that we noticed out there was some of the separators would have emission controls on them, and some would not. And I've broken these out by whether we measured it with high flow or OTM, just to show a little bit of a difference. But so of the 95 that we screened, 15 had controls of some sort. And so this could be basically either instead of using gas for the pneumatic actuation, it would use either nitrogen or air, or it could have some sort of event control on it where you basically would capture the emissions that were present and then route them to a different part of the process. And so, interestingly, what we found was that the separators with controls on them were having many fewer emissions noted, and the emission rate in total was generally much lower. And so it seems like the attention to separators is making an impact there. And then we saw a similar thing with tanks. And so for this one, we had a little bit more of an even split, 65 to 62 for controlled and uncontrolled tanks. And we noticed fewer emissions on the controlled tanks and a lower emission rate overall on any emissions that we did find. So that was an interesting thing. And then just to go back and look at this, there was a prior study on marginal wells that measured some wells in Colorado. And basically what we found on that study was that the basically emission frequency, if we look at basically the both column, so the one that's highlighted there, and then beneath that is the top table is for the previous study and the bottom two are from this study. We found that in the prior study, separators were found leaking 101% of the time, so more than one emissions per separator. And at this study, we basically found that they were only found emitting half of the time. And so that's a pretty big reduction on separator leaks. Tanks were fairly comparable between the two studies, so didn't see a drastic improvement there. And again, this is sort of an aggregate at a high level, understanding the causes of each of those things. You have to go into a bit more detail. It's tough to make a blanket conclusion just from the fact that they're the same. I think the separators are drastically different enough that yeah, there's clearly something happening there. Wellheads, basically low emissions from wellheads in both studies, very low in this particular study. Like I pointed out before, less than 1% of them were found emitting. And then again, with this study, the average emission rate, if you basically look at the number that you measured, divide the total emissions by that, and then scale it up to the total number out there as an emission factor, and then come up with your sort of total population emission factor for each of the two studies, that is. You see that separators went down quite a bit by either method. And as it should be noted there too, that so basically when you look at the column at the bottom table on the right, where you have the separators, 1.17 SLPM per separator in the previous study, this 1.3 SLPM with the high flow. And so that's going to exclude any combustor exhaust, and the OTM is going to include that combustor exhaust. So basically that's all in you're looking at. There's only a few measurements, so there is some limitations to this data, but it looks like there's half the emissions on separators between now and the previous study, which was 5 years ago or so. Tanks looks like in this one happened to be that we measured more, and wellheads fairly low on both studies. So yeah, hopefully that painted a picture of our study and all the activities that we did for everyone, pointed out some interesting observations. But in conclusion, we selected and surveyed a sample of marginal wells throughout the state, considering the specific preferences with the community and operator parameters that we talked about. And so when we went to all these sites, we identified and quantified any methane emissions that we saw on wellheads and other supporting equipment using the OGI, the high flow, and the instrumented truck with the trace gas analyzers, using the OTM method. We looked for distinguishing factors that might have contributed to increased methane emissions. Equipment count on location is the most strongly correlated factor with methane emissions. And the average well age on location did not seem to be correlated with methane emissions at all. And just other sort of observations that we made while we were out doing our measurements was that the emissions appeared to be lower on the separators and tanks with controls. So it seems like they're doing their thing, they're functioning. And then the emissions on separators and well seems to be lower in comparison to the prior study. And that's all I have for you today. And so thanks for the time and the opportunity to do the study and share the results with you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. We really appreciate you being with us. A lot of detailed information. Hopefully we can have the slide deck shared to us if we want to get further down into the details with it. Commissioners, Mr. Vaughn is open for questions. Commissioner Oath?
Thanks, Mr. Vaughn. I really appreciate all of this information. As Chair Robbins noted, it was a lot of dense information, so we'll look forward to kind of going through it again. But I guess initial question is it seemed like there were a lot of wells and a lot of locations chosen, and they seemed to be kind of geographically diverse. And it was, it wasn't all of the wells that you considered or that were eligible, but it seemed like maybe 2/3 or so or something. So just wanted to see from your sense if you felt like the ones that ended up in the study are representative in terms of geographics, type of different equipment, et cetera, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I can't answer that definitively because we haven't been to every site, but basically the limitation there was that we were working with operators that responded voluntarily. But within that, I mean, we saw a pretty broad cross section from basically almost purely oil wells to basically, dry gas wells and sort of everything in between. We were all at different corners of the states. We had a little bit of a variation in the well age. There was a handful that were quite old, a handful that were quite new, and most were in the 10 to 20-ish year old range. But yeah, I would say we had a pretty wide variety. And within the realm of other things that I've seen sort of nationwide in my experience, um, I I would be surprised if in Colorado we ran across something that was very, very different than what we saw. There might be a few exceptions to that with certain flavors of oil production equipment, but I'm not sure what impact that might have on the actual emissions that we saw. So yeah, I would say it was a fairly robust and representative sample from what I've seen in my prior knowledge. But again, without going everywhere and seeing everything all at once, can't answer that definitively.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Others with questions? All right. Thank you very much again. We really appreciate you being with us and providing the report and its findings to us today.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we've got one other docket. It's an OGDP. Let's take a few minutes and get that docket set up. We'll take our morning break. It's 10:31. Let's return at 10:41, and we'll take up that last matter. Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission, Wednesday, August 6th. It's 10:42, and we start with docket 241100293, an oil and gas development plan. The applicant is Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas Onshore LP. The subject is the Parsnip Fed OGDP, and as is usually the case for OGDP located in Weld County, we'd love to hear from Brett Kavanaugh with Weld County. Good morning.
Good morning, and I just wanted to address. I always find it interesting and very. I like hearing from the ECMC staff as it relates to the marginal well plugging programs, marginal well methane emissions, and definitely want to hear more information as it relates to that and how it relates to Weld County. So just want to make that statement. It's always good to hear from ECMC staff. So thank you for those presentations today. As it relates to this before us, thank you again for the opportunity to speak here for Weld County's 1041 WOGA process regarding Kerr-McGee's Parsnip Fed HZ oil and gas development plan. Weld County held a pre-application meeting for these locations on May 22nd, 2024. Attendees included Kerr-McGee staff, OJED staff, Weld County staff, ECMC, CDPHE, CPW, and the cities of Fort Lupton, Brighton, School District RE8, and Adams County were also invited to the meeting but did not attend. 1041 WOGA application for Parsnip was received December 20th, 2025. Weld County did not receive any applications for intervention. The 1041 Weld hearing for Parsnip was held on May 8th, 2025, at which time the hearing decided the applicant was missing critical requirements set out in Weld County Code. The hearing was subsequently continued until June 12th, at which time Kerr-McGee or KMOG satisfied the outstanding requirements. On June 12th, 2025, the applicant's application was approved. The final order for the parsnip was recorded with Weld County Clerk and Recorder and was noticed to the Greeley Tribune on June 28th, 2025. Approval of the Kerr-McGee's application creates a vested property right pursuant to Article 68 of Title 24. 2A comments were submitted to the ECMC on June 11th, 2025, and are included in the director's recommendation. Due to the fact that Kerr-McGee has completed the 1041 application process and that a final order has been issued, recorded, and legally published, Weld County has no additional concerns with the pending ECMC permit and would recommend approval. At this time, this concludes my presentation, and I'm open for any questions.
Commissioners, questions of Mr. Kavanaugh? No questions is a good thing. That means you did a good job explaining the position. So thank you very much, Mr. Kavanaugh. I know how to find you if we have other questions later today, but for now, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Jost, next would be swearing in of your witnesses. And good morning.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Yes, if everyone could come on video, and we are still trying to get Anthony Rader on, so we may have him join. Oh, actually, there he is. Okay, wonderful. We are good to go with all of our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Boudreau.
Mr. Boudreau, there's lots of swearing that's needed at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll try to get through all of it. I'll ask each of you to be visualized while we do the swearing in. I'll call your name. When I do, please raise your hand, state your first and last name, and swear to tell the truth. We'll start with Anthony Rader.
Anthony Rader, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Bo Woodward.
My name is Bo Woodward, and I swear to tell the truth.
Byron Griffin.
Byron Griffin, I swear to tell the truth.
David Crowder.
David Crowder, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Apologies if I get this name wrong. Jillian Yamartino.
Yamartino, yep. Jillian Yamartino, I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Justin Nelson.
Justin Nelson, and I swear to tell the truth.
Margaret Raleigh.
Margaret Raleigh, I swear to tell the truth.
Matt Wells.
And Mr. Boudreau, Matt Wells is just sharing the screen, so we don't need to swear him in.
Thank you, Ms. Joe. Rachel Friedman.
Rachel Friedman, I swear to tell the truth.
William Hess.
William Hess, I swear to tell the truth.
Ms. Jost, did I get everyone?
Yes, I believe you did. Thank you
very much.
All right. With that, Ms. Jost, the screen is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let us go ahead and get our PowerPoint up. Matt, if you want to go ahead and share. Perfect. Looks great. Chair, does that look good on your end?
Yes, it does.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, good morning, Chair, Commissioners, staff, and members of the public. My name is Jamie Jost, and I, along with my partner, Kelsey Wazelinki, represent Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas Onshore LP and this docket number 2411-00293 and the Parsnip Fed OGDP application that was submitted to the Commission on November 22nd, 2024. Kerr-McGee would like to thank the ECMC staff and director for their hard work on this application, as well as the CDPHE for the consistent engagement and communication, and also Director Kavanaugh for his remarks today, and Weld County for its participation through the WOGLA process in support of the Parsnip Fed OGDP. Next slide, please. The Parsnip Fed OGDP proposes one new oil and gas location, the Parsnip Fed pad, to develop a total of 22 horizontal wells within one proposed drilling and spacing unit, totaling 2,560 mineral acres for the development and operation of the Niobrara, Fort Hays, Codell, Carlisle, and Sharon Springs formations. The location is in Weld County, and as Director Kavanaugh indicated, the 1041 WOGLA permit has been approved. The review of the parsnip-fed OGDP falls under Rule 604B1, as there are 5 RBUs within 2,000 feet of the parsnip-fed working pad surface. All 5 RBUs have provided informed consent. The presence of the 5 RBUs within 2,000 feet of the proposed location is 1 ALA trigger for the parsnip-fed location, and there are 2 RBUs within a disproportionately impacted community within 2,000 feet of the pad, which also triggers the disproportionately impacted community ALA criteria. The team will describe the ALA process and how the siting of the proposed location and the BMP commitments will protect and minimize potential adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and will also protect against adverse environmental impacts on any air, water, soil, or biological resources. Kerr-McGee will describe its protective development in detail today, but to highlight a few points, Kerr-McGee will use drilling rig engines powered by grid power or non-fossil fuel generated power and will demonstrate best efforts if unable to utilize them. For hydraulic fracturing operations, Kerr-McGee will use EPA Tier 4 final non-genset or equivalent engines. All oil-based drilling fluids will be Group 3, and Kerr-McGee has committed to 35 CDPHE recommended BMPs on the parsnip-fed location. Due to the location of the parsnip-fed site, Kerr-McGee voluntarily incorporated several of the December 15, 2024 cumulative impacts and enhanced systems and practices rules into the parsnip-fed Form 2A. Although the cumulative impacts and enhanced systems and practices rules did not become effective until December 15th of 2024, Kerr-McGee acknowledged the value of utilizing several of the new rules as they relate to disproportionately impacted communities because the parsnip-fed pad is within 2,000 feet of a disproportionately impacted community. Specifically, Kerr-McGee voluntarily incorporated the following cumulative impacts and enhanced systems practice rules, or BMPs, into their Form 2A. Rule 301F3, Rule 301G2A and B, Rule 304B2E, and Rule 315B1 through 4. In terms of the parsnip-fed OGDP submittal, Kerr-McGee complied with all notice requirements for the OGDP by providing written notice of the completeness determination, the application and corresponding exhibits, and the notice of hearing to the interested parties, and published the OGDP notice in accordance with statutory and Colorado Commission regulations. No formal petitions were filed and no public comments were received. The director determined that the parsnip-fed OGDP complies with all applicable requirements of the Commission's rules and provided a conditional recommendation of approval for the Commission. The conditional recommendation of approval requests that Kerr-McGee incorporate one condition of approval on the Form 2A. This condition of approval is that the operator shall perform a survey to precisely measure the distance from the nearest point of the oil and gas location southwest to the nearest point of the RBU in the disproportionately impacted community to confirm the distance is greater than 2,000 feet away. The operator shall submit the results of this professional survey via Form 4 sundry to the location and have the sundry approved prior to the commencement of drilling operations. Kerr-McGee agrees to incorporate the recommended condition of approval into the parsnip-fed Form 2A. Today, Kerr-McGee respectfully requests approval of the parsnip-fed OGDP, and we look forward to presenting to you. With that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Rachel Friedman of Kerr-McGee to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Jost. Good morning, Chair Robbins and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Friedman. I'm a geological advisor with Kerr-McGee, a subsidiary of Oxy USA, Inc. It's my pleasure to review our proposed parsnip-fed OGDP with you today. We'd like to extend our thanks to both ECMC and Weld County staff for their efforts on this application. In our presentation today, we will cover a variety of topics, including best management practices, siting considerations, and our extensive community outreach at this location. The parsnip-fed OGDP consists of one location, also called parsnip-fed, which will be used to develop 2,560 acres using 22 wellbores. The location is proposed in the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 20, Township 1 North, Range 66 West. The land is now owned by Anadarko E&P Onshore LLC, which is also a subsidiary of Oxy USA Inc. The parsnip location is within Weld, and both the city of Fort Lupton and the city of Brighton are proximate local governments. Next slide, please. The parsnip location triggers 2 ALA criteria as a result of the 3 occupied RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface shown in orange. 2 of the occupied RBUs are in a disproportionately impacted community shown in light blue shading. There are also 2 abandoned and uninhabitable RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface shown in green. The uninhabitable RBU immediately southwest of the location is on the parsnip parcel, owned by Anadarko, and will be demolished prior to construction. The uninhabitable RBU north of the location is on land owned by Brannan Sand and Gravel and will be demolished, although the timing has not been communicated. We have secured informed consent from the 3 owners of the occupied RBUs, including the 2 within the DIC. Therefore, this OGDP will be presented to you under 604B1 standards. The rules are silent regarding abandoned residential structures, so we worked with ECMC staff to understand the most conservative course of action. As a result, we secured informed consent from the owners of the abandoned RBUs, Anadarko and Brannan Sand and Gravel. As you can see from the aerial photo, the area is very industrial with multiple gravel mines, factories, and heavy commercial activities. Martin Marietta operates the mine directly west of the location. Because they have buildings within 500 feet of our proposed parsnip location, informed consent was required for Weld County regulations. They signed that consent in November of 2024. We'd also like to take a moment to note that the New Vision mobile home community is outside of 2,000 feet, with our working pad surface planned to be 2,023 feet from the furthest northeast RVU in the mobile home park. Kerr-McGee will comply with the COA and will survey this distance to the northeasternmost RVU in the mobile home park once the pad is built, but prior to drilling to confirm that these homes are outside of 2,000 feet. Next slide, please. The pre-application meeting for this location was held in May of 2024. The timing of this OGDP with the cumulative impacts rulemaking is unique, with the rules being heard and approved while Kerr-McGee was preparing this OGDP for submission. Kerr-McGee recognized that early implementation of the cumulative impacts rules could benefit the area around the parsnip location while increasing the level of analysis that we could provide to the Commission on this complex location. We voluntarily held a pre-application community meeting in November of 2024 and submitted an extensive cumulative impacts analysis. Our application was submitted to ECMC in November 2024, prior to the CI rules going into effect in December. The WOGLA was submitted in December of 2024. The OGDP application was deemed complete in April 2025, after which we held a post-completeness community meeting in May. There were no public comments received on the 2A or interventions. The WOGLA was approved at hearing on June 12th and recorded on June 28th. The director's recommendation for conditional approval was received in July. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee submitted a detailed cumulative impacts analysis that adheres to rules 315B2A through 315B4. This contained an assessment of past, present, and reasonably foreseeable impacts in this complex, heavily developed area at the center of 3 municipal and county jurisdictions. The analysis also included an evaluation of EnviroScreen data that we coupled with our extensive community outreach to understand existing impacts, particularly how we might consider offsetting those impacts both operationally and through non-operational venues. The ECMC Cumulative Impacts team let us know that providing this document has been instrumental for them to determine how they'd like the information in future CIAs prepared and presented. I will now have Margaret Rowley from our Stakeholder Relations team walk you through our community outreach. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Rachel. While this timeline slide is quite information intensive, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple points here. Our stakeholder relations team has been heavily engaging with this area for over a year and well before submission. As you can see, we started initial conversations with adjacent industries in March 2024 and began specific outreach to stakeholders and the nearby mobile home park in September 2024, once we had a tentative plan to share. We conducted both pre-application and post-completeness community meetings at the appropriate time. We also conducted several waves of door-to-doors, specifically to those within 2,000 feet, the mobile home park, and a combination of the whole area. Informed consent has been signed by all 3 occupied RBUs within 2,000 feet. Next slide, please. It was important to involve the community in the permitting process early and collect their feedback to be incorporated in the planning process as much as possible. We always start with a tabletop review of census demographics, linguistic reporting, and environmental justice data via CDPHE. Our goal is to understand communities and their priorities to proactively address issues and develop beneficial outcomes. We are also committed to creating opportunities for conversation with those who live or work near our operations. We had extensive conversations with those that live within 2,000 feet, those that live within 1 mile in the DIC, and the mobile home park. We also sought feedback from surrounding municipalities, community gathering areas such as local rec centers, and adjacent industries that have been operating in the area for years. Soon after permit submittal, large signs in both English and Spanish were placed on location facing the high traffic areas for the awareness for the greater area. We have received several calls from commuters asking about project details and sharing their feedback. We conducted 3 community meetings, 1 in person before the permit was submitted, and 2 after completeness, including a virtual option. While those were lightly attended, it was a good chance for our subject matter experts to interact with those that did attend. As with every mailing and meeting, we upload all the informational materials to our stakeholder relations website for anyone's review and reference in both English and Spanish. Kerr-McGee's response line is a live and local communication avenue for all community members to share their feedback and concerns throughout the life of the wells to ensure transparency, coordination, and mitigation directly with Oxy. Next slide, please. As we continued engagement with stakeholders in the area, they shared feedback about the proposed project. The majority of questions revolved around noise and visual impacts of the long-term location, as well as existing traffic concerns during drilling and completions. They were pleased to hear about our noise mitigation plan and haul route that was planned specifically to avoid as many receptors as possible. Many of the stakeholders shared that they have lived in the area just a few months, while others have lived there for many years. We heard from residents in the mobile home park that they have been historically experiencing inconsistent water availability. There were also voiced concerns about the lack of safe places for young children to play. Homes in the area shared concerns about the traffic speed and volume, especially in a nearby 4-way stop. As you can see, some of the verbal feedback overlaps with the EnviroScreen data indicated at the bottom of this slide. We recognize that it's important to combine both data and shared feedback for the most complete community overview. Next slide, please. We use both the tabletop review and the direct feedback from the community to better enhance our standard design. KMOG is planning on the plugging and abandonment of 31 wells and the removal of 15 facilities in the area, which will reduce emissions and the proximity to oil and gas. 7 of those wells are within the DIC boundary. The demolition of abandoned structures on Anadarko E&P onshore property was also a positive for stakeholders in the area, as trespassing and squatting were mentioned as an ongoing concern. Next slide, please. The aerial map on the right shows the area around Parsnip and the cities of Brighton and Fort Lupton. Our intent is to focus most directly on those stakeholders in the immediate vicinity of our operations for benefits while also helping the larger area. We plan on offering a 1-year family pass to the Fort Lupton Rec Center to those households within 2,000 feet, 1 mile in the DIC, and the mobile home community. Additionally, we will offer food-safe water storage containers and water filters to those residents so that they can store water as needed for use when water is not available. The intent behind this choice is to address historical concerns and provide a consistent avenue for water availability at all times for those stakeholders through access to locker rooms, showers, and drinking fountains. We would like to note that Kerr-McGee does not anticipate any impacts to water from our operations at the Parsnip location, which was also noted by CDPHE. The rec center passes will provide access to workout facilities, locker rooms, and the pool with free drop-in childcare in an effort to alleviate concerns verbalized to us and noted in the EnviroScreen data, including providing a safe place for children to play and access to a place to bathe in the event that running water is inconsistent. Improved fitness can address both heart disease and mental health concerns noted in the EnviroScreen, and the pool could provide a reprieve on extreme heat days. For the larger Fort Lupton and Brighton area, Kerr-McGee will also provide a donation to the Brighton Rec Center's Fun Shine Summer Care Program that is focused on younger children, and to the Fort Lupton Rec Center's Teen Summer Program. The respective rec centers were instrumental in sharing their feedback about where the donations would be most impactful for their communities. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to note that Kerr-McGee is already intentional with its significant giving in Colorado. We were able to direct the bolded items to specifically benefit the people near the Parsnip location, including passing out grade-specific books and backpacks to children at Butler and Twombly elementary schools, which are the designated schools for children in the Parsnip area. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Margaret. As mentioned, we will use 604B1 for the Parsnip Fed location. Rule 604B1 provides an exception to siting within 500 to 2,000 feet of one or more RBUs if the operator obtains explicit written agreement to the proposed location from the RBU owners and tenants. Next slide, please. As a result of the 3 occupied RBUs near Parsnip, Kerr-McGee submitted an alternative location analysis. 5 alternative locations were considered to the preferred Parsnip location. AL20 would have 8 RBUs within 2,000 feet, 2 of which are within a DIC. AL17 would have 11 RBUs within 2,000 feet, 4 of which are within a DIC, and would leave 25% of the DSU undeveloped. Although AL35 does not have any RBUs within 2,000 feet, it is upgradient of a wetland, and the surface owners at this location are not interested in oil and gas development on their land. Using this location would also leave 25% of the DSU undeveloped. Next slide, please. AL13 does not have any RBUs within 2,000 feet. However, it is within the external buffer of a public water supply well, upgradient of a wetland, and within Mule Deer Migration Corridor. The location has been in use for a water resource project since 2008 and would leave 25% of the DSU undeveloped. AL18 is within a floodplain and upgradient of a wetland. It is also within the internal buffer of a public water supply well, where surface disturbance is not permitted. It is also within mule deer and bald eagle high priority habitat and would leave 25% of the DSU undeveloped. The preferred location is the most protective that will allow Kerr-McGee to develop the full DSU. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee can avoid impacts at the Parsnip location by siting outside of high priority habitat. However, suitable burrowing owl habitat is present, and therefore Kerr-McGee will perform CPW protocol raptor nest surveys prior to construction and consult with CPW if any nests are identified. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee's intended development schedule is shown here. The location will be developed in 2 occupations starting in 2027. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee has evaluated the existing well bores up to 3,000 feet away from the planned parsnip wells for zonal isolation. Kerr-McGee will plug and abandon 31 wells and remove 15 facilities, reclaiming 17.8 acres. This will remove 28 oil tanks, 14 water tanks, and 1,452 annual truck trips from the area. Next slide, please. After interim reclamation, Kerr-McGee will have reclaimed nearly 10 more acres than are disturbed by this development. Of the total 31 wells that will be plugged and abandoned, 21 are within high priority habitat, shown in pink, and 7 are within the disproportionately impacted community, shown in blue. 10 facilities will be removed in HPH and 2 in the DIC. The removal of these locations will reduce pollutants, including 5.22 tons per year of NOx, 16.75 tons per year VOCs, 5.55 tons per year carbon monoxide, and 0.26 tons per year of benzene. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee is able to reduce impacts by using our tankless design. Piping hydrocarbons away from the location will remove 84,045 post-production truck trips. Eliminating oil tanks from the location removes the largest source of emissions. Kerr-McGee is able to pipe produced water away from the parsnip location, eliminating another 10,000 truck trips and 50,000 diesel miles. Bringing water for completions to the location via the Water on Demand network will eliminate an additional 149,000 truck trips. Altogether, over 240,000 truck trips can be eliminated at this location. Next slide, please. The upcoming slides are very detailed, but we wanted to highlight our best-in-class BMPs and our use of the avoid, minimize, mitigate hierarchy. The items listed in green are CDPHE commitments. Blue text represents CI rules and enhanced systems and practices that are being implemented, and black text represents Kerr-McGee's BMPs. In efforts to reduce emissions, Kerr-McGee will not store hydrocarbons or produce water on location, and commits to use electricity to power the drilling rig. Next slide, please. To reduce freshwater use, Kerr-McGee will incorporate produced water recycling at the parsnip fed location. Kerr-McGee will protect groundwater from any incidental spills by using enhanced soil compaction techniques to minimize absorption and downward migration of fluids, in addition to using berms and geosynthetic liners that will be inspected regularly. Next slide, please. To mitigate noise, Kerr-McGee will place sound walls on portions of the north, west, and south sides of the parsnip location. If a complaint is received, Kerr-McGee will address the complaint and will work with all parties to ensure resolution. Kerr-McGee will use Group 3 drilling fluid, eliminating mud-derived odors. Next slide, please. HPH is avoided at the parsnip location, and Kerr-McGee will perform CPW protocol raptor nest surveys prior to construction and consult with CPW if any nests are identified. Ditch and berm will be installed around the perimeter of the location and all topsoil stockpiles to intercept and divert stormwater and sediment from precipitation and melt events. Next slide, please. Pre-existing vegetation cover will only be removed where necessary for the operation of construction and development at the parsnip fed location. The City of Fort Lupton maintains the roads that will be used for this project. Kerr-McGee is entering into a road maintenance agreement with the city that may stipulate mitigation measures. Mitigations listed in that agreement may include payment for any damage caused by Kerr-McGee traffic. Next slide, please. Construction will take place during daylight hours with no need for lighting. During drilling, completions, and flowback, Kerr-McGee will use LED lights with the minimum acceptable value for safe operations that will be directed to task areas as well as inward and downward. Next slide, please. Although the BMPs shown today are extensive, there are numerous other BMPs that will also avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts included in the other plans submitted, but not discussed here, including the Waste Management Plan, the Emergency Action Plan, and the Cumulative Impacts Analysis. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee consulted with CDPHE regarding the post-parsnip OGDP in May of 2025. Kerr-McGee has committed to 35 CDPHE recommended BMPs. These include eliminating oil and water storage and the commitment to use an electric rig. CDPHE noted in their letter to the director our proactive approach to community benefits that will offset existing impacts and acknowledge our commitment to BMPs that will prevent and reduce air emissions. Next slide, please. Our site-specific air monitoring plans will be approved by CDPHE. We will have air monitoring in place during drilling completions and the first 6 months of production. Over 14,000 benzene samples have been collected, with all results significantly below health guidance values. Air monitoring reports will be submitted at the end of each month to CDPHE and posted on our website. Next slide, please. To summarize the parsnip OGDP, no public comments or petitions were submitted to the application. The location will minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and will protect against adverse environmental impacts on any air, water, soil, or biological resource. The Weld County 1041 WOBA was approved for the parsnip location in June of 2025. 100% informed consent was granted by the RVUs within 2,000 feet of the location. Extensive community outreach conducted by Kerr-McGee allows Kerr-McGee to provide impactful community benefits that will offset existing impacts. Kerr-McGee will provide beneficial impacts by plugging and abandoning 31 existing wells and 15 facilities, reclaiming 17.8 acres, some of which are in HPH and DIC areas. Kerr-McGee's operational BMPs will minimize adverse impacts, including the use of Group 3 drilling fluid, electric rigs, three-phase pipeline takeaway, and sound walls. The director recommends conditional approval of the location, and CDPHE supports the BMPs proposed at the location. Thank you for the opportunity to present this location to you. With that, I'll now pass you back to Ms. Jost.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Kerr-McGee believes that the parsnip-fed OGDP provides protections of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and is an approvable application. As such, Kerr-McGee respectfully requests this commission approve the parsnip-fed OGDP application, the corresponding drilling and spacing unit application, and the requested relief set forth on this final slide. Thank you for your consideration of the testimony and evidence provided today. And I'd like to go ahead and request that our panel of subject matter experts go ahead and come on screen and join us for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jost, and thank you to the panel for the presentation of the OGDP. At this time, the panel is open for questions from commissioners. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I was hoping to get a little bit more information on one of the parts you discussed with respect to some of the stakeholder engagement. I think you said there was some discussions from commuters as well. Can you provide a little bit more detail on where exactly they were commuting from, what kind of information they were specifically talking about, et cetera?
We place the signs that say proposed oil and gas location facing the county road that goes north-south. And so as people are driving from Fort Lupton to Brighton or vice versa, they would call and ask just questions about what is the plan, what is the timing, what will go there. It was more general questions about the aesthetics and the timing. than anything else.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? All right, seeing no further questions, the next phase is commissioners move into deliberations. Does any commissioner desire to initiate deliberations on this OGDP? Commissioner Cross, then Commissioner Oath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief in saying that I will be voting in favor of this. I think this was a great example of some of the difficulties faced and the good work that we did with the cumulative impacts rules. And I appreciate Kerr McGee taking the efforts to, even though those rules didn't apply at the time, taking into account some of what would be coming under our cumulative impact rules and using those, talking to the community, making sure that they did efforts to benefit the community with the things such as the paying for the rec center, the summer programs, et cetera. I do think that's helpful, and I appreciate the work done on that. Obviously, the proximity to the mobile homes is concerning, but I think, as was said in the CDPHE letter, I think that especially the amount of offsets that are provided here is helpful. And I think if you look back at the presentations that were provided to us this morning in talking about in some of the old wells, a lot of times where you're seeing leaks is not necessarily the wells themselves, but some of the production equipment, some of the separators and things like that. And so the fact that Kerr McGee is plugging and abandoning a lot of existing wells, getting rid of a lot of existing equipment, I think is going to be the exact kind of thing that was shown in that presentation this morning as a way to get rid of existing emissions. And the amount of offsets provided here, as well as the efforts taken and discussions that went into the disproportionately impacted community, I think are important. And overall, I think that it adheres to not only our rules, but also what we're hoping to accomplish with respect to the cumulative impacts and disproportionately impacted communities. And so I'll be voting in favor.
Thanks for kicking us off, Commissioner Cross. Commissioner Oath.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as I reviewed this application, I think there's a lot of really positive elements to it. There were two areas that caused me some pause and concern. One, Commissioner Cross, you already identified the proximity to the mobile home park. And the other was that, the completions activities are largely scheduled to be conducted during the ozone season. So spent a good amount of time thinking about both of those. With respect to ozone, I really appreciate that the BMPs that have been committed to will address air emissions to a large extent, avoid them as much as possible, and address some air quality concerns. I appreciate where this operator is with respect to their NOx intensity target, and appreciate our process and being able to be proactive in looking at any new activities and ensuring that operators such as this, if they're adding activities in an upcoming ozone season, are still able to stay in compliance with their NOx intensity targets. And then third, agree that having a strong plugging and abandoning plan here is also very helpful on this area of air emissions. So that was one area of concern. And the other was, again, this proximity to the mobile home park. Really do appreciate the amount of outreach that the operator did with the community, and particularly trying to really understand what the primary issues of concern and best ways to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those concerns would be, even if they are things like addressing historic access to clean water. So appreciate the responsiveness and the plan there. Overall, I am in the same boat as Commissioner Cross and am supportive of this application.
Thank you, Commissioner Oath, for those comments. I'm in agreement with a lot of what was said by both you and Commissioner Cross. Others with comments? Deliberative thoughts? Motion?
And move for approval of the application.
And I think the motion needs to include the COA from staff relevant to the distance measuring to the 2,000-foot dwelling or something like that.
Yes, and that was talked about by the applicant as well, so I will include that in the motion.
Very good. We have a motion. I'll second. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Once again, thank you to Ms. Jost, to you and the client for the cure. There's been a lot of work by staff on this, a lot of work by Weld County. All of that results in an approved OGDP.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
All right, commissioners, I see that we have come to the end of our agenda. Does anyone have anything further? Seeing what not, I would move to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. 64 folks left. We appreciate you being with us.